A few words about our first speaker today. Jessica Nam Kim is the co-founder and now executive chairwoman of Care after serving as the CEO for the first 6 years. Care is on a mission to encourage, empower, and equip family caregivers as they navigate the complex journey of caring for a loved one. Care's I Am Not Alone care support model effectively engages the patient and caregiver to mobilize the right people and right resources at the right time. Leveraging the power of AI technology with an anthropological and human-centered approach. Care was born out of her personal experience of being the primary caregiver for 10 plus years for both her mom, who had pancreatic cancer, and her father, who had congestive heart failure. They both lived with her, so she juggled the intense life of a sandwich caregiver. She is a 3-time startup founder, speaker, mom of 3 kids, and caregiver advocate. Jessica was honored as Crane's Top 40 Under 40, Women in Health Tech, Inc.'s Female Founders List, and was the inaugural entrepreneur in residence at Brown University Nelson Center of Entrepreneurship. Jessica graduated from Brown University and received her MBA from Northwestern University at Kellogg School of Management. And we are so grateful that she traveled from Boston to be with us today. Jessica, welcome. Clicker.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everybody. Oh, do I have a mic? Do I use this mic? Okay. Can you hear me? All right. Good morning, everybody. It's good to see everybody, and I'm so glad to be here. And I'm really happy to see all of your faces. Allison and Kyle, thank you for all that you do and for inviting me to be part of this special day. And so when I flew in from Boston, as Rodolfo said, and when Allison first asked me to be here, I first didn't think that I would be able to make it. Because, as Rodolfo mentioned, I have 3 kids, and so I can't miss Halloween, right? But it was another very harsh reminder that my kids are now teenagers, and so they want nothing to do with me. And in fact, the further away I am, especially on this day, the better, because then they can go off with their friends and probably do all the mischievous things. But I will take this timing of this event to introduce myself and my family through the many Halloween costumes we've dressed up as. And so this is my family. As soon as my 3rd was born, I was like, oh my gosh, we are the Incredibles. Yes, we have the perfect makeup. And then we turned into crayons. Wizard of Oz was one of my favorites. I mean, look at the dog even. We were vampires, we were minions. I mean, we can go on and on. And then as the kids got older and they started, getting into their teenage mode, I was just like, what could we do to match your mood? And we're like, Addams Family. That is perfect because they don't need to smile anymore. So we had a lot of fun. We did miss a couple of years during the intense caregiving years with my mom. But then when it was just my dad living with us, the kids were like, the rule, Hadabaji, which is the name for grandpa in Korean. And he was like, you need to dress up as a family costume if you live under this roof. And so we were like, all right, what should we do? We got to keep it simple for Hadabaji. And so we were the Where's Waldo. How cute is he? Aw, no, that's so cute. He was such a good sport. But little did we know that he would be obsessed with this costume, you guys. He never took it off. I mean, I would put it on Instagram, and it was actually some of my friends that were like, he's wearing that shirt again. And I was like, you're right. I mean, he would just walk into my office wearing this shirt, and he's like, hey, what's going on? Did you see the news? And I was like, okay, sure. He went to the doctor's office in this shirt, okay? He would garden in the shirt. I would say, dinner's ready. He would come down in that shirt. And even on Christmas morning, he came down in that shirt. At that point, it was like the candy cane shirt. It was like white and red candy cane, and he just always wore the shirt. And it was just so cute. And the kids loved it because it was easier to find him when he was out and about, right? It's like, where's Hadabuchi? Oh, there he is, there he is, there he is. And so much, it was so fun. But for me, when I look at these photos, I chuckle, but it also evokes a much deeper emotion. Because during this time, my dad had already been living with us. He was in his 80s then, and he had congestive heart failure. And it was after many years of caring for my mom through cancer. And so he knew what my family went through and how we were exhausted, isolated, honestly burnt out. And my dad was a brilliant, brilliant psychiatrist. So I grew up with constantly being lectured about the power of mindsets and all these frameworks. And he was an amazing father. And I just love that he said, you know what? My main goal as a dad is to protect your self-confidence and to make sure that you think about things in the right way. And so whenever life got overwhelming, I remember him always saying to me, Jessica, there are things you can control and things that you cannot control. And it is your choice. And it's not always an easy choice, and so often you feel like it's impossible, but it is your choice. And in those moments, I want you to know that. So I get it, and I get what he means by saying it, but when you're caregiving, there's just so much we can't control, right? Not the illness, not people's reactions, not the healthcare system. And it feels like caregiving is just one of those things that this framework does not apply. But over time, I realized knowing what I can control and what I cannot control was one of the greatest gifts that he gave me. And so today I want to talk about how we can reimagine the caregiver mindset when we think about support. So often we hear a phrase that is meant to comfort us. You are not alone. We're going to hear it a lot today. I say it all the time. You probably say it as well. And it is so true, right? And I love that sentiment. It's beautiful. But when you're deep in caregiving, when you're juggling the medical appointments, constant accidents, and all the invisible decisions and weight that we feel, you do feel alone. And so people mean well when they say, you are not alone. But if you're like me, you may be thinking, well then, where is everyone? And I know that feeling because I lived it. My mom got diagnosed with pancreatic cancer when she was only 60 years old. And I was 34 weeks pregnant with my second child. And we were told that she only had a couple of months to live. And so I did all I could to take the plane ride down, but I needed a doctor's note. And I remember thinking that the prognosis was going to be so bad because I went to my OB and I told him the situation. I was trying to convince them. And he was like, okay, I'll write you a note. He's like, what's the worst that can happen? You can have the baby on the plane. It happens all the time. Go be with your mom. And I was like, what? This is bad. So my mom lived, though, another 7.5 years after that moment. It was a complete blessing. I am so, so grateful for that time. She was able to meet all of her grandkids. But it was also a lot. She lived through the Whipple surgery and so many rounds of chemo that I lost count. And during those early years, my dad struggled to take care of her because he was 10 years older than her. He was still working, and I'll never forget going to their house, and I saw fast food wrappers everywhere because my mom did all the cooking and cleaning. And so I finally convinced my parents to move from New Jersey up to Boston with me and my family. I was working full-time. At that point, I had 3 kids under the age of 7, and I eventually felt forced to quit my job to be her full-time caregiver. I was thrust into managing all of her medical care, performing all the nursing duties, managing all the appointments and all the logistics, and eventually bathing and carrying her as she went from this vibrant and super outgoing ball of energy to a very frail 95 pounds. I wanted to do the right thing. I wanted to nurse her back to health. I thought I could manage everything. And for a while, I did, because I was just reacting, surviving, doing it all. But slowly, I became so isolated. I realized I was alone in the hospital rooms, alone in the middle of the night, alone in the messy parts of caregiving that even my closest friends couldn't really understand. I started saying no to social gatherings, not only because I didn't have the physical energy or time, but because I felt even more isolated when friends were talking about normal aspects of life, like vacation, that just made my current limitations feel even worse. I didn't ask for help. I didn't know what I needed help with, and I was just surviving. And we were on this constant sprint just to beat all the odds to keep my mom alive. My mom was also a very private person, so she didn't want anyone to know when her cancer came back. So despite all the years, she was the hostess of the mostest, and she would invest so much in her church and her community and her friends. No one knew what she was going through. So slowly, I went from this strong person to completely exhausted, feeling very capable to depleted, feeling hopeful to hopeless. And I was physically isolated from people, but more importantly, I was emotionally cut off. No one truly understood all that we were going through 24/7 over so many years, doing all I could to care for my mom. And she transitioned to hospice into my home. Hospice in the home that lasted 2 to 3 very long months of active dying. Even in her final breaths, I was alone. So then years later, when my dad's heart disease worsened and he needed more hands-on care, I quickly realized, I was about to enter another intense caregiving journey. He lived with us for 6 years, but the last 2 years were especially intense, where he had multiple car crashes from low blood sugar, he had multiple surgeries, he went to septic shock. On top of his congestive heart failure, he was struggling with depression, which was quite ironic because he's helped thousands of patients overcome that as a psychiatrist. And we were in and out of the hospital for years. I promised myself that this time it would be different. But even with all of that experience and all of that awareness, the same patterns showed up again, because that's what caregiving does. It pulls you into that direction of wanting to have control, towards guilt, towards doing it alone. But this time, as hard as it was, I was going to follow my dad's advice. I was like, okay, it is going to be my choice in how I respond. And it felt impossible at that time, and in this way, I knew what I was getting into a bit, and I was like, I have to choose how I think about this journey about being alone. And I want to redefine what it means to be not alone. And so another phrase that we often hear is, it takes a village, right? Caregiving is a team sport. I was actually talking to Allison about this concept as we were preparing for this gathering, and she mentioned that it was actually a core part of last year's theme, which I love. I watched it, it was amazing, and it totally makes sense. And as recent as a few months ago, I was gonna center my whole talk around caregiving as a team sport. But then I had so many conversations with fellow caregivers, and I deeply reflected on my own caregiving journey and all that I'm processing now, and my thinking has changed. I understand the intent of this statement. I think caregiving should be a team sport. It does require more than one person or a few people to sustainably care in the way that you want to do without losing yourself. But let's define what a team sport really is first, because I think these words really matter, because what we say shapes how we think, which then, more importantly, sets our expectations, right? And so let's talk about what a team sport really is. So my daughter just graduated from high school, and she got recruited to play college lacrosse, which is awesome. And when you think about the lacrosse team, it is required to have 10 players on the field at all times, or you actually have to forfeit the game. You cannot play, you know? And not only that, but each of these players are specifically trained for that position. They have to show up every time and to put in full, equal effort at all times. That is not the case for caregiving. As caregivers, we are often the only one on the field. Even if people show up, we have no control over when or how. And so the reality today for most of us caregivers is that caregiving is not a team sport. And so when we try to reimagine the caregiver's mindset about support, let's first acknowledge this truth for ourselves. Caregivers, you are the main player. You are often on the field alone, and you are the only one who has to show up day after day. Everyone else is in the stands cheering, or maybe coming in for one play or two and then leaving, and that's the reality. But if I stop there, wouldn't that be so depressing? Goodbye. So what if instead of, expecting a full team, we let go of that concept and instead look at different kinds of support from different groups of people, and together it still forms something a little more whole. And so I started thinking about caregiving more as a puzzle, okay? When we think about help, we often think about it as all or nothing. You either have it or you don't. Either people show up perfectly every single time or don't show up at all. But support isn't one giant piece that fits or doesn't fit. It's made up of smaller, irregular pieces, each one different, yet so valuable if you put it in its right place. And so I have been obsessed with puzzles lately. So this is a picture of my actual puzzle on my dining room table right now. And of course I chose, a 1,000-piece puzzle, because why not? But let's think about how you actually build this puzzle, right? You don't dump everything out and assume that it's going to make sense. In fact, it's actually quite overwhelming, right? You also don't wait and search for that perfect piece to even get started. What we do is you start sorting by the types of pieces, right? The corner piece, the edge piece, the middle pieces, the pieces with the colors, anything you can recognize and group together. And in a similar way, when we approach getting help and support, let's not start with who is going to help me, but instead think of the different types of support we even need. And so let's go through these different types of support. And so when you think about the corner piece, right? For me, I really think that this is emotional support. Because as caregivers, we are doers, but we are nothing if we are not anchored in our values, our beliefs, and all of our emotional stability. And in fact, we overlook these things because we're so focused and prioritizing on the tasks and the doing, because there is just so much to do. And sometimes it's easier to mindlessly do rather than stop and actually face the reality of how we're feeling. But we all know that leads to burnout. And if you're burnt out, we're really ineffective. And so support here looks like that person who patiently listens to you vent without judgment and without trying to fix everything. For many, this could be a support group or therapy. Personally, what really worked for me was I asked a close friend to be my venting partner. I literally asked her, can you be my venting partner? Because what I realized was I just felt so bad being negative all the time. I felt bad complaining and always talking about all the things that was happening in my day. So instead, I would bottle it up and I wouldn't say anything to anybody. And then no one would even ask me how things were going, or how is your caregiving, or how is your mom, how is your dad, which was so hurtful. But then I realized, how are they supposed to know if I didn't say anything? And so I asked my friend, can you be my venting partner? But we set up rules. I said, I will warn you. I will say, oh my gosh, I'm having one of those days. I'm having a venting moment. Can I do that right now? And she always had the right to say, I love you, Jess, but this is not a really great time, but let's chat later. And that was actually really critical and important, because that allowed me to freely always go to her with my venting moments without thinking, because I always knew that she can express her limits and it wouldn't ruin our relationship. This was a huge game changer for me. And it's just one of the many examples of a corner piece to address the emotional support. And then we have the edge pieces, okay? So these are your structures, your systems. This is the foundation of care, the daily routines, the systems that keep things going, and when that weakens or breaks, everything else feels more chaotic. So some examples of edge pieces is the informational support, right? Creating a care planning, knowing the resources. There's a lot to figure out: eligibility, requirements, what's out there. Another example is medical liaison. What did the doctor just say? How do you interpret it? What does the report tell me? Do we understand the medical treatments, side effects, next steps? And then, of course, the financial guidance, understanding what insurance covers, how to move assets around, finding and dealing with lawyers and bankers and power of attorneys. These are just some examples of the systems that you put in place. And some of us are gifted in that, and some of us are so overwhelmed by it. But we need this structure. And so think about these types of support that are keeping you up and awake today. Then we have the centerpiece, right? This is the core care work. This is what only you can do, which is different for all of us. But it could be the daily care and coordination. You are the center of all of these pieces together. And I won't even try to list all of the things, but it's a direct care of your person and all that it entails, as well as being the point person for all the other pieces and structure coming together. Then we have the accent pieces, okay? So these are the small but powerful gestures. These are the texts, the meals that get dropped off, 5-minute check-ins, invitations to outings that give you no pressure to attend, but can you please still invite me? One time a neighbor stopped by my house, and we would see each other every once in a while. And one time I just told her, oh yeah, because I think she saw that ambulance at my house once. And she just dropped off a coffee cake because it was on sale. And she wasn't a very friendly neighbor, I would say, but she came by and she's like, well, I figure you'd need some cake with all the coffee you must be drinking. Thinking of you. And she literally left. I was like, thank you. It didn't solve anything, and I think maybe I had a bite, but gosh, it meant a lot. That was an accent piece for me. And I know an example is, I didn't post much because my mom was very private, which added to the loneliness, but I mentioned something on Facebook, and my old high school friend, I haven't talked to her in decades, and she just cared for her dad and also her brother, and both of them passed away, and so she just understood. And all of a sudden I would get these Friday texts from her. Sometimes it's a quote, sometimes it's a funny emoji, and it was just like a constant for years. That was an accent piece that kept me alive. Again, she didn't do anything. She wasn't taking things off my plate, but it meant so much to me. And then you have the filler pieces. So support that fills the gap in the moment. So this is when the unplanned things happened. right? So when, let's say, care coverage. So say you're rushing home from work, but there's major traffic and there's like a 45-minute gap between the care shifts, and you need someone to fill in. Or that you're at the hospital all the time, back and forth, and it takes 30 minutes each way, and so you don't have time to take your dog out. I have 2 dogs. That's stressful. Or we're in Minnesota, right? And so all of a sudden, who knew it was going to snow last night? And that is literally my roadblock of getting out of the house. Who's going to shovel that snow and help me? These are the filler pieces, the unexpected. And then you have the bridge pieces. These are the connections and gatherings. These are people, programs, and organizations that connect you to the right people and right resources. These may be the local community programs, social workers. There is a new Medicare program like GUIDE, which is Guiding an Improved Dementia Experience for Dementia Caregivers. I heard through the improv that we have a dementia caregiver here. And which, by the way, it is a pivotal program where core traditional Medicare pays for caregiver support. They'll match you up with a navigator who will be a right-hand person throughout the whole journey, 24/7 support, and even $2,500 of care coverage, all paid by Medicare. This is critical because it's one of the first times that a government program is recognizing that family caregiver as a critical part of the care team and actually putting resources towards it. And so IoniCare is one of, we run some of those programs, so if there's any caregiver out there, please email me and I'll get you connected. But that's an example of a really important bridge piece. Bridge pieces are also conferences and gatherings like Caregiver Con, where we come together for a day to really connect with one another, and it really, really matters. And so thinking of caregiver support as a puzzle highlights the fact that no one piece completes the whole picture, right? No one person is going to be in the center with you at all times. But together, piece by piece, it does create something just a little bit more whole. And this approach also helps us combat a very common thing that we face as caregivers. It's one of the biggest traps we fall into, and it's our expectations, right? So how many of us expect people to show up based on the type of relationship we have with them? Yeah, right? You know, she's my sister. She has to show up. We're the same blood. She has to have the same amount of responsibility. It's her dad too. Plus she's older. Where is she? Or, gosh, she's one of my best friends. I was always there for her. Why isn't she checking up on me all the time? She should know exactly what I'm going through and feeling at every moment. But, you know, that expectation, while completely understandable, often leads to disappointment. And because disappointment, the definition of disappointment is the gap between what you expect and the reality of what actually happens. And that gap happens a lot in caregiving. Especially because not every single person is built for the same type of support, right? Some people are really great at logistics, and some others are really great at the emotion part. A few people can do both, but not very long and not all the time. And it's also not that simple. And so as an example, I am the youngest of 3 kids. I have my brother, my sister, and then myself. And my big brother and my dad, you know, they didn't have the smoothest relationship all the time. They had their fallout in his early 20s where they didn't really talk for many years. And so he had limitations to how much he was going to support my dad during this caregiving. But initially, I was expecting him to take the lead as the oldest child, as the only son, and be super involved. And I was in that all or nothing mentality. It was all or nothing. Anything less than that was just not enough in my mind. And I kept getting disappointment, where it then led to bitterness and then resentment. But then I realized I was asking for the wrong type of help. I no longer ask my brother to come sacrifice his vacation just so maybe my family can go on vacation. I no longer asked him to be at the hospital bedside for many, many days. He had his limits of these direct interactions with my dad, but instead, I put him in charge of all the finances. I asked him to work it out with the banks, to figure out all the mail, to pay the bills, to figure out how we're going to manage all of this care. And this was a huge help. He was remote, and so before that, I thought he could do nothing. But instead, he was super involved, which made him feel so good too. And it was a critical support in ways that I did not have the capability or energy for. So once I started seeing support as a puzzle piece, everything changed. I stopped asking, why isn't anyone helping me? And instead saying, well, what kind of help do I even need? And what can this person, organization, or service offer? And how can I fit that into the bigger picture? And you know what? When you start with the types of support, the people you think who can help you actually change, right? So when I started thinking, gosh, all this insurance stuff and all this navigation is so confusing, what do? I was like, my sister would absolutely not be the person to help me with that, right? She has no idea what's happening. But instead, I started thinking about my other friend or coworker who used to work in insurance. They probably know what to do. And people can also surprise you when you start with the types of help. You know, at IonaCare, our platform, we've served over 50,000 caregivers and their families, and so we see thousands of support requests and different teams and the relationship of the different team members. And it was so surprising, but you can clearly see that so often it's not the closest people in the caregivers' lives who become their constant support. It's that random person at church who just felt so compelled to help, or it's that fellow parent at the baseball, games that you would chat here and there, and then you find out that she also was a caregiver for someone in their life, and then ended up helping out with things around the kids. It's that older retired neighbor who you often see when you're walking your dog together, who is always around and offers to bring in the mail or to check on the person you're caring for to make sure they took their meds. So I once again applied my dad's framework. I cannot control who shows up or how they show up, but I can own my own internal expectations. I can control whether I ask for support and communicate needs up front instead of expecting people to read my mind in the midst of their own busy lives. I can control my perspective. So instead of receiving a one-time visit and saying, oh, and you think that's enough, I instead approach it with gratitude of, wow, thanks for giving that afternoon off for me. It didn't make caregiving easy, but it made it less lonely. I no longer expected that team on the field with me, but I can now see the people in the sidelines and stands holding the little puzzle pieces that mattered. I just had to shift my mindset to actually receive it. But this metaphor would not be complete without talking about the missing pieces. Every puzzle has missing pieces. We'll still feel hurt when people don't show up when they should, right? And as much as we clearly communicate, boldly ask, or adjust our expectations, the pain still is there. And perhaps you did all you could, and still no one is around to help. These missing pieces also represent the types of support that will forever go unmet, or the emptiness that we feel from constant anticipatory and ambiguous grief that we feel every single day. The missing pieces are a part of our shared reality. And that is something that only others going through it can fully understand. And that's why I love this conference. I love this gathering because this community is one of those missing pieces. this community is one of those puzzle pieces to fill in that missing piece. Every time you come, share your story, you nod in recognition, you cry in understanding, you're building connection. You're adding a piece to someone else's puzzle. And this isn't just an annual gathering, it's proof that we're rebuilding the community in what that really means in caregiving. You're showing that not doing it alone doesn't mean that you have a full team that does everything for you, but instead that you're part of something larger with people who really get it. Each of you arrived carrying your own puzzle, the challenges, the context, the pieces you found that really worked, and also those missing gaps. The person sitting next to you today may leave thinking, gosh, I am not alone, because that other person is going through the same thing or totally understands what I'm talking about. And so your presence and perhaps some of the friendships that you make here will become someone else's edge piece, corner piece, filler piece. And Allison, actually, where is she? She's up there. She's a perfect example of this. We were strangers on Instagram, okay? You can see our first message here. I was so desperate to find people that connected with the caregiving situation, and so I was searching for hashtag caregiving, hashtag cancer, and I started following her, and as we all know, that she's so authentic and real and comforting. And so we started chatting online, and now 6 years later, she is one of my corner pieces. She's an anchor for me. I know I can call her or text her with very raw thoughts that even some of the closest people in my life don't know. And so she's just an example of how you can meet a complete stranger, but this shared journey really connects us on a deeper level. So all of you here today, you took the energy and coordinated all the things, all the logistics to be here. So I encourage you to put yourself out there. But here's the beautiful thing. It is not up to you to complete someone else's puzzle. If you can just share what you can, if you can just connect in the way that you're able, and if you're just quiet and intently listening to someone, that is more than enough. No matter where you are in the caregiving journey, whether you're just beginning and you want to learn, whether you're completely in the thick of it, or if you're like me, where I'm still recovering and trying to processing all that just happened. So I want to return to the phrase, you are not alone. Even though people say that to you, it's really only something that you can declare for yourself. And so when we started our company, we named it Ionicare. We named it I Am Not Alone, because our mission isn't to tell people that they're not alone, but instead we want to encourage and empower and equip caregivers until they feel ready to declare it for themselves. And so I just wanted to share a little context to what Ionicare is, because we've referred to it a lot, but what we do is we put all those pieces of support together in one organized place, and we surround you with the right people and right resources. We work with Medicare and health plans and employers, but we do have a free caregiver organizer app and desktop solution here, no strings attached. When we built the company, we said we still have to give it to caregivers because everyone deserves the base level of support. And so we made it free for the world. And the free caregiver organizer helps you build this puzzle. It helps you identify your support needs, and it helps you match it up with the people that say, I want to help you, but don't often know how to ask. You could also stay organized with calendars and notes and keeping everyone updated. And I mentioned this a lot, but there are a lot of programs out there, but you just have no idea what exists. And so you may qualify for these programs. Sign up for our newsletter. We're always trying to announce programs that either we run or don't run that just caregivers should know about. So I encourage you to do that. And so as we spend time here today, I hope you carry this phrase with you. Again, not as something that someone says to you, but as something that you can one day say for yourself. Because when you can finally say, I am not alone, it doesn't mean that the caregiver load is gone. It doesn't mean that caregiving is no longer hard or complex, but it just means that you're starting to build your puzzle. You're starting to find your people, your resources, your community, and even yourself. And that's really where the real power of caregiving begins. And so thank you so much for being here today. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for being a puzzle piece in all of our puzzles. We really have to believe that we truly are stronger together. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you so much for that.